first time I kissed Ethan, I thought my heart might burst. It was a rainy evening, and we were painting together in his studio. The air was thick with the smell of turpentine and rain, and I couldn't hold it in anymore. His eyes widened as I leaned in, but he didn't pull away. For a fleeting moment, I felt like the storm outside had spilled into the room, and I was caught in its center. But to truly understand how we got to that moment, I need to go back to the beginning. When my parents died in a car accident, my world fell apart. I was 18, barely out of high school, and suddenly I had no home, no family, no direction. That's when Ethan, my godfather, stepped in. He was my dad's best friend, the man who had been at every one of my birthdays, who gave me my first set of paints when I was 6. But he wasn't supposed to be my guardian. He was supposed to be the fun uncle figure, not the person I'd rely on to pick up the pieces of my shattered life. Moving into Ethan's loft in the heart of the city felt surreal. He was everything I wasn't: confident, successful, and self-assured. At 38, he ran a thriving art gallery and lived in a space that was both minimalist and filled with bursts of color from his paintings. Ethan had always been a free spirit, someone my dad admired for his boldness and creativity. At first, I didn't know how to fit into his world. I spent most of my time in the guest room, headphones on, playing the piano or sketching aimlessly. Grief weighed on me like a heavy coat I couldn't take off, and I didn't want to burden Ethan with it. But he had a way of quietly pulling me out of my shell. One morning, he knocked on my door, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "Thought you might need this," he said with a small smile. "Thanks," I muttered, taking the mug. "You know," he said, sitting on the edge of my bed, "this place is as much yours as it is mine. Don't feel like you have to stay cooped up in here." It was a simple gesture, but it meant everything. Slowly, I started to join him in the kitchen, in the living room, in his studio. He never pushed, never pried, just made space for me to exist. Ethan's studio became my sanctuary. Watching him paint was mesmerizing. The way he moved with such purpose, his brushstrokes bold and unapologetic. I started asking questions about his work, and he'd explain his process, his inspirations, his struggles as a queer artist in a world that didn't always understand him. He encouraged me to create, too. "Art's not about being good," he said one day. "It's about expression. Just let it out." I began writing music again, composing pieces that reflected the pain and hope swirling inside me. One night, he caught me at the piano, my fingers gliding over the keys. "Did you write that?" he asked, leaning against the doorway. "Yeah," I admitted, my cheeks burning. "It's for my parents." He walked over, placing a hand on my shoulder. "It's beautiful, Leo. They'd be proud." His words stayed with me, a small light in the darkness. As months passed, I started to notice things about Ethan I hadn't before. The way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, the way his hands moved when he painted, the way he always knew when I needed space and when I needed someone to sit beside me. He wasn't just my godfather anymore. He was my anchor, my safe harbor. But those feelings scared me. I didn't know if they were wrong, if they'd ruin the bond we'd built. Still, they grew impossible to ignore. Ethan, too, seemed different around me. There were moments when I'd catch him watching me, his expression unreadable. He started lingering in the living room after dinner, asking about my music, my sketches, my thoughts. He'd laugh a little too hard at my jokes, brush his hand against mine when he passed me a coffee mug. I told myself it was nothing, but my heart refused to listen. One evening, as we cleaned up after dinner, our hands brushed while reaching for the same plate. He froze for a moment, his fingers lingering against mine. I glanced up at him and our eyes met. The air felt charged, but he quickly pulled away, mumbling something about needing to check his emails. That night, I lay awake replaying the moment in my head, wondering if he felt it too. One afternoon, I came back from a run and headed to the shower. The door was slightly ajar, and I didn't think much of it as I stripped off my shirt. I could hear Ethan moving around in the living room, the clink of a coffee mug against the counter. As I stepped into the bathroom, I turned to close the door and froze. Ethan was standing in the hallway, his eyes locked on me. He quickly looked away, his face flushing red as he mumbled, "Sorry, I didn't realize." "It's fine," I said, though my heart was pounding. I closed the door and leaned against it, my mind racing. The way he had looked at me wasn't just accidental. There was something else there, something I couldn't ignore. Later that evening, we sat in awkward silence over dinner. I could feel his tension, the way he avoided looking directly at me. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "Ethan," I said softly, "is everything okay?" He glanced up, his expression conflicted. "Yeah, just a lot on my mind." "Me too," I admitted. The words hung between us, heavy with unspoken truths. It was a rainy evening when it happened. We were working on a painting together, laughing about the mess we were making. Ethan had a streak of blue paint on his cheek, and without thinking, I reached out to wipe it away. Our laughter faded as our eyes locked, the storm outside mirroring the turmoil inside me. Before I could second-guess myself, I leaned in and kissed him. For a moment, time stood still. Then he pulled back, his eyes wide. "Leo, I know," I said quickly, my face burning. "I know it's wrong, but I can't help how I feel." He didn't respond right away, and the silence was deafening. But in his eyes, I saw something I hadn't expected. Confusion, yes, but also longing. For days, we danced around each other, the kiss hanging between us like an unspoken secret. I thought he might shut me out, but instead, he came to me one night, his expression conflicted but determined. "I can't stop thinking about you," he admitted, his voice raw. "But it's complicated. It doesn't have to be," I said, stepping closer. "I know what I want, Ethan. I want you." He hesitated, his hands trembling as they cupped my face. "I'm scared, Leo. Scared of what this means, of what people will think." "I don't care about anyone else," I said firmly. "I care about you." I reached for him, my hands resting on his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart beneath my fingertips. Slowly, I slid them up to his shoulders, pulling him closer. He shivered under my touch as I trailed my fingers down his arms, pausing at his wrists before letting them settle at his waist. His breath hitched as I moved my hands around to his back, tracing the muscles there, feeling the warmth of his skin through the thin fabric of his shirt. "Ethan," I whispered, "just let this happen. Let us happen." And then he kissed me. This time, it wasn't hesitant. It was everything I'd hoped for. Passionate, consuming, right? His hands found their way to my hips, pulling me closer until there was no space left between us. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the windows, casting golden hues across the room. Ethan sat across from me at the kitchen table, his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. The air was thick with unspoken words, and I knew we couldn't avoid the conversation any longer. "I couldn't sleep," he admitted, breaking the silence. "Last night, it was everything I didn't know I wanted. But it scares me, Leo. What do we do now?" I reached across the table, placing my hand over his. "We figure it out together, one step at a time." He looked up at me, his eyes searching mine. "People won't understand. They'll judge." "Let them," I said firmly. "All that matters is us. We've already been through so much. We can handle this." A small smile tugged at his lips. "You're braver than I am." "No," I said, squeezing his hand. "We're brave together." In that moment, I knew we'd find a way forward. It wouldn't be easy, but it would be worth it. Have you ever experienced a connection like this? A relationship forged through shared loss, mutual understanding, or unexpected emotions? What are your thoughts on our story? I'd love to hear your perspective or any similar experiences you've had. Feel free to share your story. Your voice matters.